Hello, everyone. Welcome to Casual Watch Talk, the Sunday social. We've got a full panel to talk about we must be the last YouTube live stream to talk about this, but we're going to give it a go. We're going to be talking about Rolex and Bucherer being bought. But before we do that, before we delve into that meat, should we, Pete, do you want to do us a wristwatch check?
I forgot. I'm on the hot seat. Okay, so I am wearing... Come on, focus. It's not going to focus. Why aren't you focusing? Anyway, I am wearing my IWC Pilot watch. It's the RAF collaboration they did. Black ceramic with a blue dial. Looks just apart from that, so a little kind of IWC Mark 20.
Oh, pretty cool. Dave, what are you wearing? Put you on solo.
I have my Accutron. So it's my Accutron Space View 2020, the newer generation one with the electrostatic movement in it.
Oh, nice. Did it come on that green?
Nope, this was the original. I think it was a limited edition when it first came out in that colorway anyway, and it just came in a plain black. It was quite a nice strap, but it was just plain black. And this is a strap from what's their name? The French lot. Nicholas, help me out.
Oh, Jean Rousseau.
They've got a place in Jean Rousseau. That's the one. They've got a place in
London,
London,
Jean Rousseau.
And I wanted them to match. I wanted them to match the green on the kind of, let's say, electric green color with the strap, which is my videos decided to go. It's got a red rubber liner in it as well. So yeah, it's actually really well made. There was a funny story about that, but we've not got time for about
it. I wonder, Dave, whether I put everything on. Yeah, I put everything on 1080p, so I'm wondering whether I've actually is actually sucking more juice than it needs to. Nicholas, you're up next. What are you wearing?
So I'm double wristing, especially for this evening. I thought I'd wear my 1970 Rolex Datejust 1600 smooth bezel with a grey linen dial, which is just been restored and is a lovely piece. And I thought very appropriate. So it's nice to have a Rolex back on my wrist. And then on the other wrist, I have Fears Redcliffe watch number 1, the very first Fears. So next week after the public holiday, I hopefully on Tuesday, possibly Wednesday, will be completing on a very large Fears deal. I heard from the lawyers this morning that everyone's signed the paperwork, and that means the last week I've been wearing this as my lucky charm just to get the deal over the line. And even though this evening I was like, I want to wear the Rolex because we're talking Rolex, I was like, I am far too sentimental. I'm not joking. Every single day I've been washing and drying my lucky underwear because I'm like, I need to get this deal over the line. And so the last week, this thing has been on my wrist. So I don't get me wrong. I love wearing this watch, but usually I will change my watch up most days. I'll be wearing a prototype or something. But Redcliffe number 1 has been the firm favourite until the middle of next week.
Okay, breaking news, everyone. Rolex is buying Fears.
Rolex.
Yeah, the Bucherer was a bit of a
smoke screen
decoy. Yeah, that was a decoy duck.
Yeah. Seiko, Todd, what are you wearing?
Oh, well, in honor of today, I took off my Seiko, and I have my Bucherer Heritage Annual Calendar. There it is. Annual Calendar Chronograph.
Nice.
Big date. One of their movements that I think I forgot now if it's based on. Yeah, I think it's built. Yeah, it's built on a ETA undercarriage, like a 2894. But the chronograph module on top is an annual calendar. It's probably from Depuis de Poix, I believe. And then, but it's a heck of a piece.
And I have to say that, oh my goodness, that large date, and I love the fact they did the discs in black. Like, that is the exact watch you don't want them to match. Like, it brings out, it's beautiful.
That's the Panda. They did a great job with the Panda. You're right. Thank you.
Yeah, and the big date is just I love that watch. Sorry, Sam, to interrupt you. I just
No, please, no.
I'm a massive Carl F. Bucherer fan, and that is exactly to me what they do so well. That kind of old school, kind of slightly dressy chrono. No one else really does that anywhere near like them. So yeah.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I do love it, and it's actually a favorite of mine to go travel with too. I have another GMT watch, but it's just, I don't know. You're right. It's just one of those things that I just really enjoy because you can feel it on the wrist. It's got some heft, and they did a beautiful job decorating the movement below too, which won't show up all on my camera, so I won't even try. But they did a really nice job with it.
Awesome. And then I'll round it out with wearing the Rolex to commemorate the occasion.
2 Rolex versus 1 Bucherer. No wonder you guys won.
Well, if let's just have a little talk. Let's just do the intro. If anybody's not heard, Rolex bought Bucherer. Who were Bucherer? Originally they gave Rolex the break, didn't they? They let Rolex make the watches at the Bucherer store, or there's some link there, not there? And
originally, Carl F. Bucherer did that,
Yeah, because Hans Willdorf very famously came from a marketing background rather than a watchmaking background, and then Bucherer. Then they always had this symbiotic relationship where Bucherer was probably one of the biggest retailers of Rolex. Bucherer has got over 100 stores worldwide. About 50 of them were Rolex, carried Rolex. The other 50 Tudor, and then of course they bought Tonneau. Which anybody who's ever been into a Tonneau in the last 2 years will know that Carl F. Bucherer bought them because they won't let you escape the door without going through the full range. Which was my joke about, did Rolex really want to buy Bucherer, or did they just go into a Tonneau and they couldn't leave until they bought the whole company? So now Tonneau, but then the question is, the question to the panel is, do we care? I guess, or is it significant? I mean, it is.
Can I jump straight in, Sam? I'm going to be pernickety. Yes. You said Rolex is bought. They are buying. It has not yet been signed off by the Swiss company's competition commission.
They've not got the lucky wear on, is what you're saying.
No, everyone's assuming this is a massive Swiss company, massive Swiss export, Swiss brand buying another big family run. One is owned by a charitable foundation, which incidentally means it doesn't pay any corporation tax. There you go. That's an interesting fact. And the other one is, 3 generations. I mean, Jörg Bucherer, who's now 90 years old, is meant to be one of the last people in the watch industry who knew and worked with Hans Willdorf. So, this is a real, so we assume it's going to be a rubber stamp, right? This, of course, is a natural place. But until it's signed off, until it goes through, who knows what's going to happen? So sorry to be pernickety, but maybe it's because I've just spent the last week with lawyers. I'm just used to.
And I watched. Everybody else is saying that they bought them, aren't they? All the YouTube videos that I have, but
no, they have an agreement in principle to buy them, and if the regulator says fine, then fine, they'll buy them. But don't underestimate a Swiss regulation body. They love to have a bit of a poke around, and as much as the Swiss have a few jokes up their sleeve, people like to joke about them, they like a rule as well. And this could potentially fall foul. To be honest, the vast majority of what people are saying in regards to, this is Rolex's move into retail and stuff, Rolex will be doing everything they can to prove that that's not the case, because if they openly want to get into retail, this is never going through. It will not go through in a million years, because they have a market dominant position as Bucherer do, and they have a market dominant place within Bucherer. There's no chance it will go through if that's their narrative. But I don't think that's their narrative anyway, but we can get to that.
Yeah, many years ago, I was doing a deal with a company and for a telematics deal, and it fell through because the British Competitions Commission got involved. I don't know whether it ever finally went through, but it delayed the deal, and it was basically Dr. Oetker, which is a big German brand. They famous for having frozen pizzas in it, well, amongst many other things. And they were trying to buy Goodfellas Pizza, which is a British frozen pizza brand. And it came across the competition commission because they would have too much of a dominant position in the frozen pizza market. And that was at the time. So yeah, you never know. I mean, we thought that was a done deal. But Pete, what's your take on this?
I'm in a strange position of not really having one. I suppose it's weird for me because I think of Rolex just like every other company, just a little slower. And this just makes complete sense. I mean, if you look at, you said yourself earlier, Rolex began life with a jeweler with a big marketing background who understood that. Establishing a watch company and then spending the next century buying his suppliers. So you bought his case maker, bought his movement maker, bought his dial maker, bought his crown maker. It's just kind of like the next logical step to buy your retailer. So I'm not going to pretend I saw this coming because I wasn't really thinking about it. But if you sort of sit back and look at how does Rolex operate, there's no one else for them to buy but Bucherer. So it's kind of like the only thing they could do with all that money. It's fascinating to me what might come next. I suspect I actually agree with Dave. I don't think they want to change the world. I think if Rolex has been trying to discipline ADs for ages. And stop them selling out the back. And it's one thing to wave your big thick threat stick around saying, you be a good boy, or I'll take your right to sell my watches off you. It's another thing altogether to do that whilst you yourself own some ADs. It just puts a nail through that plank they're holding over their ADs. But I think it's going to be mostly just an in the background threat. I don't think it's something they want to wheel out unless they absolutely have to.
No.
The one thing I would say, if I was going to, and being a little bit facetious, I think this is a move designed to save Tudor.
Dave says no.
And the reason why it's a little bit facetious is Tudor's stalled. Their growth is going nowhere. For the last 3 years, they haven't moved position at number 15. I think in a little while, how we all know that you have to play the game to climb the greasy pole and be able to buy a Rolex. I'm pretty sure that within a year or two at Bucherer's, you're only going to be able to do that by buying a Wilsdorf Foundation product. So if you walk in and you want to start becoming a preferred customer through a Bucherer store, you buy a Rolex you don't want, a Tudor you don't want, or a Carlos Bucherer you don't want. You don't have to buy. And if you do buy an Omega or a Breitling or a Cartier, great, but you're not becoming a preferred customer.
So there's a couple of things I want to just jump in with. One was, we're talking about Hans Wilsdorf being, this great marketer. So you know what he openly stated his philosophy for Rolex and Tudor was? Philosophy, where he basically said, only great marketing is required to make a successful company. So, I mean, he himself was very open about the fact that that's what he's doing. But in terms of and actually in the comments, there was a good point about from Underachieving Watch Collector says, the deal makes sense since Rolex owns half of Geneva and has more money than Scrooge McDuck. Well, so there's a few interesting points here in that, yes, Rolex, Hans Wilsdorf Foundation has huge amounts of money. And, allegedly, please don't come and sue me, they're meant to make more money from their real estate globally than they do from watches. The Hans Wilsdorf Foundation is a family-owned foundation. It doesn't have to pay corporation tax, and it's there and generates a huge amount of money, which it does donate a lot of money to charities. But, when you look at it, Rolex, I've been on panels with you guys discussing this. Rolex can't make to 5 million watches a year because it would damage the brand and, you know, it's not logical. But therefore, how do you generate more money? Well, Bucherer turns over 2 billion a year, right? And, you know, they have been on an acquisition spree. So it's a really good way of going, well, actually, as an organization beyond Rolex watches and Tudor watches, if you want to make more money, you buy this growing retail empire and keep growing, and it makes more money for the Wildorf Foundation. It's a really clever way of doing it. And I kind of think there's a lot behind this where it's just going, this is just a very savvy business decision. You know, it's going historically, and I don't know if this is the case. I did a bit of research today to try and see, when I worked at Rolex, we were always told that in the Wildorf Foundation, like, I don't know, what is it, a constitution, you know, the founding document, it always stated that, you know, Rolex couldn't be sold, no one could own it, you know, but also that Rolex couldn't merge and it couldn't acquire other watch brands. We were always told that. That's why over the years it hasn't become an LVMH or a Richemont group. So for me, this was really shocking because it was like, well, hang on a moment. Bucherer has a brand and it's a very distinct company. It's one thing buying, you know, office space, you know, it's one thing buying freehold. Because actually, that's a good point. Look at London, look at Bond Street. You know, Rolex has been buying up quite a few of they're the main landlord. So actually, quite a few of the luxury watch brands on Bond Street, their landlord that they're paying their rent to now is a company owned by Wildorf. So it's really interesting to see. The Wildorf Foundation go on their website. It's basically one page. It tells you absolutely nothing, but it is fascinating. So I think this is a pure thing of going, we can make a lot of money by growing Bucherer to be the global retailer.
I think it's actually that may be partly the outcome of it, but I think the reason for this is much simpler, as usually these decisions are, is much simpler than most people are realizing it is, which is Bucherer are, at the end of the day, the largest retail partner for Rolex globally. Yeah, end of story. You know, they've got 100 outlets, of which a huge number do Rolex. Simple as that. It's a family-owned business. It's a family-owned business that they've had a relationship since day one with. They've got a very cordial, friendly, tight relationship with them and have had since day one. Every other retail partner they have is either a very small, independent, family-owned business who is, in the broad scheme of things, meaningless. You lose one, you lose two, doesn't make any difference. Or they are, as we'll say, capitalist organisations. So you've got your Watches of Switzerland Group, publicly traded company. You've got, you know, all of these other businesses that are generally very much different to what Bucherer is. Bucherer is an anomaly. The size it is, the amount of business they do for being a family-owned business is not the norm in this day and age. And there is no line of succession. And they've said so. And Rolex are like, if we don't buy them, it will end up in the hands of a organisation that's publicly traded, or is a stock market, or is a fund, or is related or tied to bottom line at the end of the day, and the relationship will materially change. So they've taken a preemptive strike decision to say, we will buy it because we then can maintain the status quo. If that so happens in the future that they can build it and grow it and everything else, fine. But this is about maintaining a status quo and not upsetting the apple cart. Rolex are a massively risk-adverse organisation at the end of the day. They sit calm. They don't do anything rash. This looks rash. This is the safest decision that could possibly be made in business by a cash-rich business, which is secure your foundations. And that's actually ultimately all this really is. And the fact that they're doing it is to protect what they know and love, security and safety. That, to me, that's all this is about. And everyone's saying, oh, it's about they're moving to retail, they're moving to that. If Rolex had wanted to move into retail, I mean, they're slow and they're a bit oil tankerish, but they're not that slow, yeah? They're not so successful by doing nothing. They would have done that a fair length of time ago, it has to be said. But they're not. This is very much about basically making sure that they're underpinnings of their business are secure and they're not going to materially change in the short term. Because if that business was sold to, I don't know, Watches of Switzerland, or a investor who has a bit of a panache about him, it's going to change rapid, and Rolex ain't going to like it. And there's only one set of people in the world that have got more money than Rolex, and that's the stock market.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, actually, Dave. I think that's right. I think because they're a charitable foundation, so they're not under any obligation to turn a profit, are they? So they're not, and their chess moves seem to be purposeful, don't they? I think I actually agree with you. We've just got a lot of questions that's come through, so let's quick fire through them, and the panel can react. So Bruno says, I've got to run out for dinner, but we'll catch up later. Do you think the sale of Bucherer watches will increase in the near future because of the sale? Yeah.
I 100% think so. I think it will. I think it will.
It might add. I mean, Bucherer watches, they make lovely watches, but let's be honest, in a market of brands, they are one that floats under the radar, and most folk kind of shrug their shoulders.
And that was by design, because Bucherer wanted to do no more than about 20,000 watches a year. That's what he has said. He wants to be a small brand. Now, the question is, will that change?
They also, though, in the last 2 months, something like that, made a very
public statement.
Yeah, they made a very public statement that they were dropping the vast majority of their range and only focusing on the high end niche pieces. They do some really unusual tourbillon work. They do some really unusual chronograph work. Funnily enough, guess what conversation's probably been going on for a long time, and what brand that maybe just are potentially buying them don't make anything in that category? Let me think. Do they also, though, make lots of dive watches that Bucherer no longer make?
Well, also, Dave, when you think about it, the Bucherer were the first to do the Rolex pre-owned, certified pre-owned, right? So, like, this is clearly being like, this goes back a long way. This must go back so far.
Yeah, it's interesting. So next question, Mark, who can't join us today, is going out for dinner with his wife. He says, "Are Bucherer dominant in Switzerland or any other market?" I presume he means the watches, does he? Or
I think it's probably the
retailer.
Right.
They don't exist in my market, so not here. I don't know about America, perhaps.
It's
Tenno is the brand.
Yeah, right. But even in America, it's pretty small in real terms. It's pretty much Switzerland, Germany. I mean, you can't even say the UK. You can't even say England. Really, it's London.
It was when they bought the Watch Gallery. Do you remember the Watch Gallery? God.
Yeah. They're European. They're a Eurocentric, Swiss-centric, German-centric. It's very much German-speaking market that they own. But then the Swiss market is something to behold, shall we say. There's the amount of money that some Swiss retailers sell a year puts brands into fits of tears. I mean, Interlaken, not a particularly large town in Switzerland, has 2 large retailers in that town that cover pretty much every Swiss brand that you can possibly imagine, and they do €1 billion a year turnover in retail. €1 billion in 2 stores in a small Swiss town. You do the math across all of Switzerland.
I remember reading about this. It's one of the reasons why they was studying the FH export numbers can be a little bit deceptive about what's going on in the Swiss market, because what it ignores is watches which are not exported. That is, watches which are kept and sold within Switzerland. And that apparently is an enormous market. If it was on the FH list, it would be very, very high up.
That's it. That's the second export market, which is domestically sold watches to tourists.
Yeah.
That's the hidden number that most folk don't see.
Yeah. Next, Watches with Dennis says, I wonder if long-term Rolex keep Karl F. Bucherer as a manufacturer The stores can give prime real estate to Tudor. Do they want to push 2 brands in addition to Rolex? Maybe they sell it off. There has to be terms and conditions in their sale, doesn't there, that they can't?
Yeah, they won't do that.
Yeah,
Carl
they
F.
won't.
Bucherer as a brand doesn't exist if it's not owned by Carl F. Bucherer.
Yeah. And then let's have a look. So Mark says Bucherer are currently about 2.5% of Rolex ADs, 50 out of 2,000. How they figure changes in the future will be interesting. Okay.
The answer is, in the short and medium term, it will not change.
Yeah. Chris says, I can see the small ADs losing, being pushed out by Rolex. I'm not sure. Yeah.
No.
I mean, a decade and a half already. I mean, it was about 15 years ago when Rolex started the purge, and it's still going on, not as quickly. It's slowed down. It's not like the speed Patek are doing it at the moment, but it's the small AD, unless they're willing to cough up and offer a store within a store, that they're going to lose out. Like, I don't think this will make that much difference to the small AD.
Yeah,
and it's regional as well. It's regional as well. You look, the Vempe store, Vempe, huge German. You go to Germany, Vempe is everywhere. They're the German equivalent of Bucherer at the end of the day. And in Germany, Vempe are by far and away the biggest retailer of Rolex, and they are very much like Bucherer in Switzerland. But they had a store in London. That store no longer exists. It closed a couple of months ago, and it closed because Rolex pulled supply from them. Now, when Rolex's main partner in Germany is Vempe, and Rolex pull it in England, it's because they've got a preferred partner in England. It's as simple as that. That's just business. They're not targeting the small AD or any particular AD. They're targeting people that don't suit their current narrative. It's as simple as that.
Okay.
They pulled out of Dean Bump. He'd sell Rolex out of Little Switzerland in the Caribbean. All their stores had it, and Rolex pulled out of Little Switzerland a couple of years ago. So, and you can't get it. I don't think they're in the Caribbean anymore, unless it's a Rolex store or somewhere.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, the mistake people make, and this is going back to what I said before, when you're looking at Rolex, is they think of them as some sort of like James Bondian villain that are somehow different to every other company. Actually, they're not. They're the same. And I sort of frowned before when you said Rolex is a charity, and what Rolex is a for-profit company, and it runs like a for-profit company. It's owned by a charity, but the company itself is a flat out for-profit company. I would be shocked to my core if its executives weren't paid based on the profit they make. I would be shocked to my core if the directors of the Wilsdorf Foundation didn't get a stipend based on the size of the Wilsdorf Foundation. So the concept that these people are somehow removed from capitalism is just kind of a bit fantastical. So ask yourself, if you were a big business in the sort of position that Rolex is in, that's been acting the way that Rolex has been acting for the last century, what would you do? And that's pretty much what they've been doing. They partner up with, they tend to work with bigger companies. They're tending to buy their suppliers. They're tending, and from what I understand, and again, they keep this really under lock and key. What are the tenets? What are the founding principles of the Wilsdorf Foundation? But one of them, I believe, is, or the overwhelming aim is to say that the last thing that happens just before the heat death of the universe is the last Rolex AD turns out the lights. The Rolex will be around forever. And so if you just constantly ask yourself, what's the best move for Rolex to do to secure its future? This kind of makes sense.
On that note, Pete, absolutely have, this is a company, it's here to make money. I encourage everyone to have a Google. Why did Patrick Heineke stop being CEO of Rolex in 2008? He was the son of the previous Heineke who took over from Hans Wilsdorf. He was a successful CEO, but he went very quickly in 2008 in the middle of the night. Have a Google. There's a very, very good reason why he went, and it's all to do with the pound shilling and the Swiss franc. So,
that is interesting. Yeah, we'll definitely have to look that up. So Orange Hand is saying, lots of people saying Bucherer won't be treated differently after the deal goes through. Nonsense. If there's a business advantage to it, Rolex will use Bucherer as it pleases.
Yeah, I disagree with that.
I disagree materially.
Disagree.
Because the European, don't underestimate the power of the European regulator as well. And to me, it's still a reasonably solid 50-50 if it actually gets allowed to go through. They'll be watching them like hawks for a considerable period of time, or they will make them sign pretty binding agreements as to what they do and don't do with it, at least for the medium term at the very least, so that there can be no immediate impact. Because remember as well, the Swiss have a lot to lose in this. Yeah, the Swiss watch industry is one of the jewels in the crown of the Swiss economy. It sounds hard to believe in any other country in the world, but at the end of the day, watches is one of the big three things that the Swiss are very good at. You know, they do money well, they do watches well, and they do ammunition well. And, you know, between those, they're pretty protective about them. They will not let anything happen that brings it into disrepute. They just won't. So they might let this deal go through, but there will be a lot of things put in place to make sure that it is not abused.
Yeah, and it's different because in the US, if a company gets caught out doing something naughty, they get a fine, which is so insignificant to their turnover that they just empty
Sam,
their wallet out. Oh yeah, we'll just pay it. Whereas
exactly, Sam, you know,
in Europe.
Exactly, you know, the classic case is, you know, Boeing, you know, the whole thing with Boeing and 737s, and the fact that, you know, Boeing got told pay an awful lot of money to the government and we'll pretend that it never happened. Essentially, if that was in Europe, people would be getting locked up and the keys thrown away. It's as different as that. It just wouldn't happen in Europe. It's just a different atmosphere.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. So let's have a look. So T Lux D says, just joining the show. One question: will any of the non-Rolex brands now pull out of Bucherer or to know?
If they're idiots.
Yeah,
I think they'll be watching what happens with sales. I mean, it's not like the brands aren't like us. You know, we're sitting here like killing chickens and trying to read entrails. They actually have real data. You know, they'll sit there, and if I'm, you know, I would just say if I'm Breitling, and then I sit down and see that over the next three years, my sales in Bucherer stores start to dry up, but nowhere else, then I'm out of there. You know, it's why would I stay? That's the decision that will be made. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so someone talking before about, you know, Rolex is going to like strangle the other companies. It's going to be, they're going to try and maximize their profit, both in the short and long term. And that's going to mean finding a really delicate balance about how I mess with things. I think we're going to see some fairly subtle changes. Like I said, I do strongly believe that in order to get on certain greasy poles, you're going to have to buy from the right brands, not just any brand. That sort of thing, a little bit, like I said, a little bit subtle. I doubt very much that they're going to just freeze out brands and turn everything into Rolex, Tudor, Bucherer boutiques.
Right. I mean, and to your point, how would they be able to do that? Because I could imagine, because there's a huge Bucherer store at King of Prussia Mall in just west of Philadelphia that's not far from me. And you can go in there. I even met one of the store managers one day at a Red Bar event. So you walk in now that Rolex, you know, let's pretend has Bucherer under its umbrella. Do I walk in there and say, hey, can I look at a Submariner? And they'll say, no, we don't have any of those in stock. We can't even show you one to put on to see if you want, but we'll put you on a waiting list. I mean, what marketing or how is Rolex? I know they're supposed to start making more watches, but they're going to have all this controlled retail space. I don't know what they're going to put in it. There's only so much Tudor you can put in it. Bucherer is not going to make more than a small fraction of watches per year, and they're not going to ramp that production up. In fact, I'll be surprised, like I think Dave was saying, some of the lesser quality ones, the old quartzy ones and stuff are going to go bye-bye because I don't think they're probably selling those much anyway. And look at higher horology with their peripheral rotor in-house movements and, the other things that they do really well. What's Bucherer going to sell? It's going to have to sell other brands. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a huge store, right? Unless they're going to not sell watches anymore. I mean, what are you going to do? Go see empty Rolex cases at Bucherer? I mean, I don't know how I'm very curious to see how they change that compared to what they've been doing with ADs for so long. I mean, that's
it's an interesting point, isn't it? Big V says, I don't know, maybe we'll need a link or something, but he says, I heard that Omega might pull out Bucherer. I think that might be a rumor because the thing is, they still want, Bucherer still, like you said, they still want to sell watches, and also Omega still wants that presence, don't they? If more people are visiting the store because they might get a Rolex, then there's more eyes on. I mean, maybe they don't think like that. Maybe they think they're their Rolex. And
I'll tell you this: if Omega pull out of Bucherer, that's not because Rolex are potentially buying Bucherer. That's because Omega's got another plan up their sleeve. That's nothing. They might use that as a handy excuse for how to get out of it. Because bear in mind, other brands not like Rolex, but most Richemont, most LVMH, and most of the Swatch Group stores are absolutely running a narrative of boutique and either fully owned, outright owned, or codependently owned boutiques. That is their narrative. Those brands absolutely are pulling out of ADs hand over fist at a rate that makes Rolex look like they're going backwards. And any opportunity they have in a city that's big enough, they own the boutique outright. Omega, for example, in the UK, all the London boutiques broadly are owned by Swatch Group. The more provincial towns or the smaller cities or the smaller towns, they get into bed with somebody as a partner, but that gives them control to the degree that they want to have that control. They're pushing that narrative. The biggest problem to that narrative for most of these brands is how to kill the current relationships you have without getting yourself pulled into court. And sometimes if something like this comes up, they're like, perfect opportunity. They won't pull out of there rashly, let's put it like that.
And it's a good point you make there, Dave, because, if you look in London, the Wonder Room in Selfridges is run by Bucherer. It used to be the Watch Gallery and then it got taken over. Amigo haven't been in there for over a decade, but then you look at London, they've literally got a store opposite on Oxford Street, and then they've got Regent Street and Bond Street. So, Amiga, when you look at London, they do not need to be in any ADs. They're absolutely fine.
Yeah, I think they've got 6 Swatch Group owned ADs in central London in Zone 1. Yeah. So they don't need to be anywhere else. But then likewise on Regent Street, you walk a couple of 100 yards and the main Watches of Switzerland has got Omega in there. And they also have Omega in the big Mappin and Webb right beside their boutique. So these guys, they're not stupid. These guys don't make rash decisions. They don't. It's not like a playground spat where they're like, oh, we're going to pull our watches out here because Rolex have bought them. These guys aren't that daft.
Yeah, it is funny what you were just mentioning, Dave. I was talking with some mates locally in Australia, and we were trying to think about how many retailers are left that sell both Rolex and Omega, and it's a vanishingly small number. It's not been announced. It's not been this big strategy, but it's like just slowly but surely they've formed into two kind of completely different retail chains. They don't turn up in the same brands.
No.
So broadly speaking, the only 2 brands that tend to stick together is Rolex and Patek. Those 2 brands tend to like brand alliances, or not alliances is the wrong word because they don't do it hand in hand, but they like to be in retailers where those 2 brands are there, and ideally only those 2 brands if they could have their way.
Yeah, which is actually interesting. It's actually interesting because in Australia, that's out in where I live, that's definitely the Hourglass. And the reason why that's interesting is because the Hourglass are rumoured to be the number 1 shareholders now of Ulysse Nardin and Gerard Perregaux. So that's a little quartet of fairly powerful horology.
Yeah. So I think one other news story that sort of immediately followed this was the fact that Watches of Switzerland shares went down, and they really went down. They went down 30%, I think, in the one day. They lost something like 600 million of their market value. So, what do we think that the market?
Well, I'm just going to say this was hilarious. This was I think the first time that my father has ever shared any watch related story with me on WhatsApp. He immediately, the moment the market's open, he's a corporate lawyer for an American law firm, so it obviously flashed up on his Bloomberg or something that this had happened, and he immediately sent me sort of like, are you stocked by them? Like, is this okay? Is this going to impact you? And I was like, well, firstly, no, Watches Switzerland do not stock fears. So we're quite all right. But it was really interesting because he was like, because of course it's got the name Rolex associated, like in the city of London, people who would normally not really notice anything to do with the watch industry other than, bonus time, let's go out and buy a nice watch. It was like a big chatter about this. So it was interesting that they clearly needed to come out with a statement, and they came out with so the announcement was 5 minutes before the London Stock Exchange closed. So it wasn't really enough time to have any impact properly. And then the statement came out before the LSE opened, which I thought was very interesting because they clearly wanted to be ahead of it, and it didn't really make much difference when you lose 30% in when you look at the graph, it's just have any of those stories got the graph, Sam? Because the graph is just
I'm just
not the best thing to look at. But
here we go. This will be it. So if we go to 1 month, see, I mean they lost sort of
But this further reinforces why Rolex will underpin by buying or trying to buy Bucherer. Because they don't want one of their main routes to market subject to this. And Watches of Switzerland, within reason, have done a couple of things over the last couple of years that unfortunately have potentially exacerbated this. Number one is in 2020 they made a really stupid decision to tell the world what percentage of their sales were derived from Rolex, which was greater than 50%. Now, funnily enough, they've never released since then the breakout of their sales by brand. I wonder why, because frankly that was absolutely lunacy to do that. It's like try getting anything out of Apple, for example, like how many iPhones you sell. Yes, we sell iPhones. How many Apple Watches sell? We also sell watches, Apple Watches. We sell laptops and iPads as well. They will never tell you anything because stock markets are fickle, because there are professionals and there are less professional people that operate in that sphere. And the stock market only wants one thing, good news. And when news is that Rolex have bought a competitor of, or what's seen as a competitor of Watches of Switzerland, or a threat, suddenly it's bad news. Boom, off the end of a cliff. That's just the nature of it. Most of that will probably recover. At the end of the day, I think Watches of Switzerland high was back in 21, I believe, and it was up at about 1,500, something like that. And then it's been sitting in and around kind of 500-ish, give or take, for a wee while now. And it took a 28% bump within an hour of the market opening. I guarantee you that'll even out again, because Watches of Switzerland are a strong retailer. They are one of the better ones, like them or loathe them. They do good business. They represent huge numbers of brands. So it will recover. But it was fully expected to happen, and probably by putting out a statement which was a bit wishy-washy, probably didn't help things, to be honest with you. It'll have done as much harm as it did good, let's put it like that.
Yeah, so we've got a comment here. So Alan coming in on Facebook. We're also streaming on Twitch as well. So hello, anyone that's watching us on Twitch. So this is based on pure speculation of the Rolex distributors. That was the value of the shares drop. Not that Rolex cares. But do you think non-Rolex owned stores will suffer even worse with allocation?
No.
Hey, Alan.
No.
We would never know, would we? I don't know.
You won't. Yeah, I mean that's the best point. You actually have no idea of actually knowing if that's true. The likelihood of anything changing in the short term is very minimal because, as we keep saying, they are a very staid, a very safe, a very secure, and broadly predictable. Dealing with Rolex is actually not the worst thing in the world because you're dealing with your rational uncle. You're not dealing with some like schizophrenic granny who you've no idea what she's doing from one day to the next. The good thing with dealing with them is you are beholden to the devil to a degree, but you pretty much know what you're going to get.
Yeah, and one of the things too is the old days of retailers having no clue what they're going to get from Rolex and not knowing what their allocation's going to be. Those are gone. There was that whole article in Watch Pro a couple of months ago where they were saying they're a big 21st century company. They've set up inventory control systems the same as everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
So brands know what they're getting allocated. They know what's coming months, if not a year or so in advance, which, by the way, means if your AD says, I never know what's coming, he's lying to you. But yeah,
lying to you.
They know exactly what's coming. So I think, like I said, I think there might be some subtle changes about how things work, but they will be very subtle. They'll be they'll be kind of in the margins. They won't make a great deal of difference to anyone else. I think it might be like at the very high end, Bucherer is going to have their big advantages. They'll be in the room when decisions are made. And so they'll have a sense of what's happening maybe a little bit earlier. Maybe they become slightly preferred for those allocation-only pieces. I've always wondered how Rolex does manage those allocations of very small production numbers like Rainbow Daytonas. Maybe there's something going to happen there, but
there's a hat, Peter.
I don't know.
There's a hat.
Yeah.
There's a hat. And they literally
just sorting a hat.
Yeah. Bear in mind as well, remember, we are talking here about, at the end of the day, a regional retailer. That's what Bucherer are. They're not global. They're not, they're a regional retailer. So we're not talking about somebody who's got global sphere here. If it comes to most markets and those allocations, they are an irrelevance because they're not in those markets. So it has no bearing on that whatsoever. And the reality is they're their biggest partner in Switzerland anyway. So the reality is they probably are already getting the preferential allocations because they're their biggest partner. It's as simple as that, I mean, someone put a comment up about the stock market also likes bad news. I'll rephrase slightly. Yes, the stock market likes good and bad news for sure. Certain traders like it one way or t'other. It's usually, if a company has bad news, it's rarely good for that company in short term.
Yeah.
Yeah, stock market doesn't like surprise. That's what they don't like.
Yeah, they don't.
Here's a thought on two things with it. I mean, this may be completely Sunday night thinking, but does anyone think this raises the brand cachet of Bucherer as a retailer in the minds of watch collectors and enthusiasts? If you're going to buy and you've got a choice to buy from here or Bucherer, and Bucherer is owned by Rolex. So that's one thought. The second thought is, wouldn't it be amazing if suddenly this meant that Bucherer did dual sign dial Rolexes?
Again,
I was just like, I'm thinking about the whole LVMH buying Tiffany and the whole debate about whether that meant Tiffany and Patek would keep the relationship. But there's just a bit of me that, I know, I'm far too inside the baseball, but I'm also a brand guy. Like I like brand and I like prestige. And there is a small bit of me that in the last few days, like Seiko Top, we were talking earlier before we came on about how much I like Bucherer. This has really got me going through the website, looking at Bucherer and being like, my view of Bucherer has actually changed a bit because they've been anointed by the crown. They've had the sword on the shoulders compared to other retailers. And I don't know, is that me just being crazy? But does anyone else think that could have an impact?
Yeah, so if you just while you guys, I'm going to share something that so Patrick, who normally joins us, he actually I don't know, did he buy this, Todd? Did he buy this dual signed or did he?
The dual sign Bucherer Rolex pocket watch.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. I don't know if he bought it or not.
But yeah, that's so there is a world where there was dual signed.
If he didn't, he probably is wishing he did.
So,
But what do we think? What do we think of the grey market now? So, no proof of this, but there's been an idea that some of the grey market gets these fully stickered Rolexes through certain ADs, and that's how they get the stock. Do you think this affects them?
Well, no, because
No,
I could pretty much guarantee you they're not getting them through Bucherer anyway.
yeah.
In the same way as they're not getting it through most of the more legitimate retailers, But again, I'll bring it back. It's a regional retailer, yeah? They don't have a global dominance. They are dominant in a given market, but they are not a global dominance. The grey market will, for as long as, same as any product, the minute there is a lack of ability to get what you want when you want it, somebody will find a way to furnish you with what you want for a healthy profit. That's just the way of it, yeah? I don't think it will materially change it in any great sense.
So it looks like there's 30 Chinos in the US, which probably isn't that much really. But I know there was one in Orange County. There's definitely that huge one in Vegas. I mean, it's monstrously sized, that one in the Caesar's Palace or Caesar's shops.
yeah, I think we also really need to ask this question. Is there going to be a John Wick 5?
Well, there is a John Wick 5,
Funded by Rolex.
but will he have a Rolex or will he have a? I mean, they're sort of filming it, aren't they? The John Wick 5.
Oh, they actually do. Okay, I didn't know that.
And there's a TV series coming out on called The Continental. So I wonder if there's going to be Bucherers in there. Although it goes back in. In fact, it might have some vintage Bucherers in there because it's it's Ian McShane's character's origin story, isn't it? The Continental TV series on Peacock, not a sponsor. But yeah. I mean, that John Wick 3 that was the last fight scene was just the longest Bucherer ad. It went on for so long they had to loop the Bucherer advert again on the screen in the background.
Yeah.
Yeah. I keep finding myself, and Dave's exactly right, to keep dragging us back to the idea that Bucherer is not this this world spanning, all pervasive company. Like I said, I don't think they're present in my region at all.
Right.
So I would say I'd keep coming back to if things happen at all, they're going to be really subtle. They're going to not affect 90% of people around the world. It just might be the way a couple of stores change.
Yeah. Oh, I read that too. Yeah. John Wick Rolexes.
Yeah. So, because, Watches of Switzerland I don't know this, but they must have a lot more stores, mustn't they? Because I think Watches of Switzerland owns Mayors, which is the dominant brand here in Florida. And do they own Little Switzerland, Watches of Switzerland, in the Caribbean, Todd?
No, they're separate. No. That's a privately owned set of stores, actually, in the Caribbean. What I'm wondering too, though, is that when I bought the watch I showed, the Heritage annual calendar chronograph, the center seconds was slightly off. Like when you looked at it under a loop, when I was looking at the watch in the Caribbean, of course, each store only got one. So I'm like, okay, well, what do I do about this? This is with Dean, and he said it's no problem. He said they will take care of it immediately. So as soon as I got home from that trip, there was a box at my address to return the watch to their North American, repair facility or whatever. And immediately I got emails from like the director, whoever's in charge of that. I'm like, okay, I'm putting it in the box and I'm sending it. He said, yeah, we're taking care of all the insurance, everything. It goes out. I mean, it's not gone 2 weeks and it's back. I mean, they absolutely responded like a family-owned company that's not huge, and it was really amazing service. And they gave me some other things too for my, just for my inconvenience. So yeah, I really appreciated their response to that rather tiny problem, but they did
Yeah.
fantastic.
You're
So
not
here's the
helping me,
numbers.
Seiko Todd. I want one even more now.
Yeah.
Like I'm going straight on Chrono 24 after this. Like yeah, that is a great
Yeah.
story to hear, and that's the sort of thing that
Yeah.
you hope. And certainly when I worked at Rolex, that was a lot of the inside the company. Rolex
Mhm.
is quite old school in that regard as well.
So there's your numbers. Bucherer have 36 stores worldwide. That's the grand sum of their estate.
Okay,
Of
so
which-
outside of Switzerland, what
so
makes
that's
the
36 total.
okay? So where's the 100 figure come from? Because I've heard
Yeah,
a few people
that's not what's being reflected in the press. They're saying 100 stores, 53 that
is
sell
that
Rolex.
36 Bucherer branded stores? Because I know
Correct.
even in
Bucherer
Switzerland
branded
they have,
stores.
yeah,
Correct.
even
And
in
they'll
Switzerland
have
they
some
have,
partnership stores as well.
yeah.
Yeah, there's 30 Tonos in the US. So yeah, so there might be 100.
When I'm looking at Bucherer.com and the locations, they don't have any of the U.S. ones listed, at least on the first page here. Denmark,
It's
Austria,
probably
France.
because they're not branded Bucherer in the States, are they? They're still Tourneau.
No, they are. They like the one at King of Prussia. There's a huge store out here. It's Bucherer.
Is it
Oh,
Bucherer?
actually,
Bucherer
somebody said
1888. Yeah, just like the other ones. Yeah.
Westchester. There is a Tono Bucherer in Westchester, so I wonder if it's.
I wonder if they consider. Well, maybe you know what it might be. It might be like Bucherer in North America. I think that they have a separate entity. Now that I think about it, because they have their president of of Bucherer, Carl F. Bucherer in the U.S. So that may be it. It may not be showing up on their regular website.
Okay. And then I forgot more questions come through. Yeah, so Peter, probably last question here. So Peter says the thing that risks being lost with the purchase is the appearance of impartiality Bucherer previously had. That's not insignificant when it comes to a sale.
True.
Yeah,
Well,
and this is coming back to the point that sort of that Nicholas raised earlier. For every person who's going to be encouraged by the fact that Bucherer is now owned by Rolex, there's going to be another person who says, well, there's a company I don't want to deal with anymore. So it's a bit of my suspicion is that would turn out to be a bit of a wash. The different for everyone they get, they probably lose someone. So it's not that big a deal for exactly the reason that someone said. If someone's not buying Rolex right now, there's a reason for that. And yes, that might put them off even going to their retailer.
Pete, you usually have your finger on the pulse with what's going on with Breitling, because Chanel also sells Breitling, don't they? So do you think that'll affect a relationship there?
No, I don't think so. I think it will be, for them, it will come down to money ultimately. They'll watch what's happening with sales, and if it turns out that it's a less effective sales channel, they'll just move on.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, that's been great. Thanks everyone for all of the questions. Big thanks to the panel. That was a really interesting discussion. I had like a backup topic because I wasn't sure we would we go the full hour on this one, but we did. And thanks to everyone in the comment section. So thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time on Casual Watch Talk. Thanks everyone.